I was watching this video called Critique of Jordan Peterson by an individual named Daniel Mackler. He is a former therapist and now he's a YouTuber, and he did a presentation on Jordan Peterson, so I thought we'd do a response because he has sent some very bold claims about Peterson, and I'll post a link to that, and check out his channel. It's really good. Because he's a former practicing therapist, and he talks a lot about the system, and he's very critical of it. And it's always nice to have people who ask the hard, challenging questions, or at the very least share the hard facts, of any profession. And they're just sort of telling you their own firsthand experiences in a brutally honest way. But when he talks about Jordan Peterson, there was some interesting points that he made. First, I should say that Daniel Mackler's degree, if I recall correctly, is not in psychology or clinical psychology or anything like that. His degree is actually in social work, but he was a practicing therapist for years, and I believe he is coming at this from a very different perspective than somebody like Jordan Peterson, who was influenced by not only many, many great famous thinkers throughout the time, especially people like Dostoevsky and Carl Jung. I think Daniel Mackler is more coming at this from someone who is just, experienced some things working in the field. But the discussion in his critique centered on something called Jordan Peterson's fifth rule for life. In 12 rules for life, there's number 5. Don't let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. And what he was really trying to argue was that Jordan Peterson was very much mistaken about the way that parents should treat children, because the thing that Peterson is completely misunderstanding and leaving out of the equation is that parents often have unhealed traumas, like something bad has happened to them in their life, and they haven't completely gotten over it emotionally, and they have this unhealed trauma, and they project it out onto their children. So a lot of the things that, you would don't let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. Well, that's like trying to stop people from projecting their own negative emotions onto their children, and the children aren't the source of it. That's kind of Daniel Mackler's point. It's like the children aren't the source of this negativity. It's actually the adult needs to solve their sort of emotional problems, heal that emotional trauma. Very interesting stuff. And there's a little bit more to it, because he also says that if you sort of take that approach, don't let your children do anything that makes you dislike them, that also shows a great lack of empathy for the person that you used to be. And that's what Peterson's fourth rule for life is, if I recall correctly. Compare yourself to yesterday as opposed to someone in the present. Well, it's like if you sort of, are dealing with this thing about unhealed traumas, you're lacking empathy for the person that you used to be when you were a kid. And then there's also a very interesting part here when Daniel Mackler addressed the point that Jordan Peterson talks about authoritarian systems a lot. He is very much opposed to authoritarian systems. But he also states that to children, people like parents are authoritarian. People like parents are, things such as the authoritarian system. That's just like what the parents are to the children. That's how they will perceive it. And if Peterson has these harsh criticisms of authoritarian systems, then that's what we would have, that's what children are perceiving their parents as. And once again, that's also creating some of the negativity. And there's one last very large point before we sort of say some kind of counter-argument, is that he says that a lot of things that children do might make their parents dislike them, but that's just the natural exploration of, human development. Children could be experiencing healthy behaviors that make the parents dislike them, and it could be just a purely healthy, just exploration of human thought that makes the parents dislike them. So there also is that to be taken into account. Okay, now for a little counter-argument. I would say that Daniel Mackler gave a very, very insightful critique. He showed some interesting things, especially coming at it from, a practicing therapist who did that mostly, whereas Jordan Peterson has done a bazillion other things on top of just being, a well, psychologist. I mean, he has a whole enormous resume. But the thing is, I think Peterson would probably first say something like his Daniel Mackler's criticism of him is two separate issues. What Peterson has said in his lectures is that he wants children to grow up in a world where they aren't only seeing emotions that are either negative or insincere. So you sort of need to kind of project and cultivate kind of an environment for your child so that when they go out and face the world, the emotions aren't going to be negative and insincere, meaning that, like, the only sort of friendly, welcoming, warm emotions that people are expressing when they're looking at your child are fake. And I mean, that's true. It's true. It's like what he's trying to say is just that you need to sort of turn your kid into somebody who isn't going to go out into the world and have a bunch of people hate them. Because if they're doing things that make you dislike them, then they're also going to do things that make other people dislike them, and it's just going to perpetuate the cycle of destruction. That might have been a little bit rambling, but that's the general gist of what Jordan Peterson has expressed in his lectures. Moreover, you have to remember, Jordan Peterson wants two things for children. He wants them to be disagreeable and to have conscientiousness. He has said that very clearly multiple times. Disagreeable and conscientious. If a child is disagreeable and conscientious, what was his line? They can be quite the creature or something like that. So he has to really remember that Daniel Mackler does have a point or something. He does have some things that he's saying, but Peterson would probably just be like, the focus of child development needs to be on teaching children to develop habits of conscientiousness, and they also need to be disagreeable. So this whole thing about, authoritarian regimes, like the parents are the authoritarian regime, it is good to be disagreeable. Like if you're saying that Peterson is contrary to an authoritarian regime, well, the children should be contrary to anything. They should be the contrarians, because this is what's going to predict success in the workplace. And once again, Peterson really isn't looking at something such as how to make your kid just feel light and airy. No, he said very clearly he wants children to develop these habits because this is what brings you success in life. Like if someone is not super agreeable, but they're also very conscientious, hardworking, diligent, dutiful, all of these things predict success in life. So that's why you have to do things that, or you don't let your children do things that make you dislike them. Don't let your children do things that make you dislike them. What that's sort of trying to project is that, first of all, you need people to be warm and welcoming to your child, and you also need to teach your child how to be strong, how to be confident, how to be hardworking and dutiful, and all of those sort of attributes. And that's what Peterson's real message is. I would really say that Mackler had a very good point, though, when he's sort of saying, though, that children might just be expressing some sort of healthy emotions, where it could be healthy to learn something, and they might be kind of doing something where they're just, kind of, maybe it's even pushing a boundary, but they're just trying to have a healthy behavior, and the parents aren't going to like it. That's actually something that is very large. Furthermore, I do think that it's a very good thing that he did point out that a lot of the problems that could happen with children are actually the parents not being able to deal with their own unhealed traumas. And Mackler says that this can actually be passed down not only from parent to child, but from sibling to sibling to sibling, like the parents put out the destructive, kind of emotions and behavior onto the oldest sibling, and then that person does something to the younger sibling, that person does something to the younger sibling, and so on, depending on how many people are in the family. So it's nice to hear some different perspectives on the subject, especially from, two people who are both, somewhat familiar with the material firsthand. What I would say that there was actually a part in here, though, when they're talking about the concept of sexual abuse, and this is just kind of Daniel Mackler going off on a tangent, and he brought up something when he said that both men and women can commit sexual abuse against children. And excuse me for going off on a little tangent here, but he actually said, he's like, it can be done by men or women, but let's face it, men are doing most of it. Well, all I have to say for that is, to anybody here who's listening to this, if you've made it to this part of the podcast, watch 5 seasons of the Steve Wilkos Show and just let me know how many cases of women committing physical or sexual abuse against their children take place. It happens all the time. I know that's an unscientific example, horribly unscientific, but it's like, it happens all the time, especially physical abuse. And yes, I mean, like, so many times though, like on like these kind of things about the media, they show cases of women committing sexual abuse against their own children. It is very, very real, but it is horribly unreported that women do commit sexual abuse against children. Where you're talking even infants and babies. It is very real, and we cannot downplay it. But that's just kind of like, that was a side note in his discussion. He was just kind of giving some examples of unhealed trauma. I mean, I think it's also very kind of interesting to hear that Daniel Mackler is sort of also saying that Jordan Peterson is projecting a lot of himself onto these 12 rules for life. Yes, he has worked with an enormous amount of clients. He's worked with an enormous amount of people. He's dealt with a certain assertiveness training. But what Mackler's saying is that he's actually probably coming at this with sort of a lack of empathy. And it's probably that Peterson had some sort of either unhealed trauma in his past that he never got over, and he's kind of projecting out that destructive element onto, well, everyone. Or he is just very detached from his upbringing, from his family, from whatever that was, and he never sort of healed in that way. And Daniel Mackler seems to think it's the latter. I think it's the latter, too. I definitely would think that I could see that in some of Jordan Peterson's work after listening to him in many lectures and in his Maps of Meaning course, and, well, the presentations and the debates and all of these things. It's like, I definitely think it would be something like the latter of those two, where it's like he had just distance placed between himself and his childhood and the bad memories from childhood. He just like puts distance between them. But I would really have to insist, though, that Peterson wants to recognize biology as a much more natural thing. And this was a large criticism that was brought up by Daniel Mackler. He's saying that Peterson is relying too much on nature and not enough on nurture when it comes to child upbringing. And, I mean, from the lectures that I've heard about Peterson, he's actually very big on nurture. But what Daniel Mackler sort of saying, like, I'll give an example. Peterson said once, and he was living in Montreal at the time, and that, some kid came over and approached him in French and, like, wanted to steal his hammer. He had a hammer that he was working with, and the kid said in French, "I'll steal it." And then, Peterson was just shocked and appalled that, a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old would say something like that this kid has been programmed for bad and destructive behavior. And what Daniel Mackler is really arguing, that stuff like that is only 90% is only 10% natural, 90% nurture. Whereas Daniel Mackler thinks that Peterson is just saying that kid has bad genes, bad behavior. I don't remember hearing any of that in the lecture, that Peterson thinks that 100% of human behaviors are biological. I don't remember hearing that, but that was a line that Daniel Mackler included in his critique of Jordan Peterson. He was like, Peterson might as well be saying that, 100% of your personality and your temperament, that was the exact word, is because of nature as opposed to nurture. But, as someone who's watched his lectures, I don't exactly remember him thinking like that. I think it's more like Peterson just wants people to be aware that destructive behaviors can indeed be passed down from the environmental surroundings, from the people in the person's life, as well as biology. I think Peterson believes that there are two things going on, and Daniel Mackler does too, and I do, and you probably do. Everybody believes that nature and nurture are very real and they are existing. But I do have to kind of reiterate, Peterson wants children to be conscientious and somewhat disagreeable, not to the abusive, inhumane level, but somewhat disagreeable and conscientious, so they will develop strong, hard-working habits. And as far as, don't do anything don't let your children do anything that makes you dislike them, it's also just about, if the children are doing things that make you dislike them, then you're going to get angry with them, and then you're just going to be kind of putting more destructive influence on your kid, and then you're going to be making the situation worse down the road. It's like, this is corporate strategy 101. This is educational theory 101. No matter what discipline you're in, everyone says, stop problems before they start. And I believe that that's what Peterson has created. He's saying, stop problems before they start. Daniel Mackler's approach is very, very interesting. I mean, like that he's brought up the point of Peterson is sort of for overlooking the role that unhealed trauma can play in a person's, like, what a person projects out to their children. And I think Mackler's point, though, holds a little more water, because what he's trying to say is that if you are projecting your unhealed trauma onto your kid, then it doesn't matter what the kid's done. It doesn't matter who the kid is. It doesn't matter anything. The unhealed trauma is with the parent, and the parent needs to solve the problem first. And then, before they can do anything at all associated with raising children, they have to have their trauma healed so they don't pass it on to the children. So I think that's a very, very insightful thing. And I do think, though, that Peterson probably would have a very good sort of critique about Mackler's challenge that parents are an authoritarian regime, because we've talked about it a little, but just the whole concept of being disagreeable. Yeah, parents are authoritarian, and parents do have a lot of control over the house, but Peterson wants people to challenge them. He wants the children to be disagreeable. And I think that Mackler and Peterson are talking about two very different things. I'm sure Peterson would just say that those are two separate issues. Daniel Mackler's more focused on things like happiness, contentment, joy, as well as the removal of conflict. And I think Peterson is more focused on things like success, achievement, accomplishment. Like, one of these guys is saying, this is what you need to do to sort of make your children feel better, have less emotional damage, and fewer problems in life. And then Peterson is saying, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to do to have your children succeed in school and succeed in the workforce once they become an adult. So I think that both of them have some very separate points. I mean, absolutely. Both of them have, kind of an interesting, insightful view. And once again, I do have to reiterate, maybe that could come from some point that Daniel Mackler's, degree is in social work as opposed to clinical psychology. So, we're probably dealing with a little bit of a different disciplinary method. And definitely some things, associated with Peterson's whole stances on neurochemistry and all of those things. They're probably coming at those things from totally different perspectives. But it's nice to hear different points of view, and we do have to recognize that with people like Jordan Peterson or any of these other people online, even Daniel Mackler, we need to challenge them. And we can't just be like, hey, this guy has all the answers, he's going to be my guru, he's going to be my sort of just self-help genius, he knows everything. No, we need to challenge these people, because that's what the whole game is, That's the whole point. These guys aren't putting out absolutely perfect information, nor am I. So it's like, if you have anything to say at all, please leave a comment below. Challenge me on anything. If you think that I'm completely wrong, tell me everything and tell me why, and just let's discuss a little more.